Throughout history, the idea of debt and investing, whether it be in a herd of cows in the mid-3000s BC or purchasing shares in Apple, has always been prominent in business and trade. Today, almost 1 billion shares change hands every single day in the stock exchange, but it wasn't always that way. According to Charles Geist, a Wall Street historian, Wall Street has gone through several phases throughout 4 different periods of history. The first period would be from the 17th century to around the time of the Civil War. During this time, investors were merely dabbling in the ideas of investing in the stock market, and it quickly gained popularity among these groups. The second period could be described as from the Civil War to the early 1930s. This period covers the development of trusts, which are groups of landowners who allocated responsibility for the management of the land to a certain person in the group to benefit others. This period also falls in the time of the development of major railways throughout America, which greatly influenced the stock market because of the effect it had on American companies, which could now trade goods much more easily and quickly without the barriers of horse-drawn carriages. The next period was rather short and spanned only from 1929 to 1954. This period was not one of prosperity, as the Great Depression began to affect eager young investors. The U.S. government also became wise to the shenanigans of the early investors and placed tight government regulations on the stock exchange. The final period took place while Eisenhower was president and revitalized the stock market because of rising stock prices and a booming economy. People began taking loans from ruthless loan sharks, and until later legislation were not protected by the government for such things. From this period to modern day, the stock markets have come together to essentially form what we know as Wall Street today. Early European stock exchanges, otherwise known as bourses, were set up in the early 1600s so that the government could sell things to the people to raise money. European stock exchanges are still to this day called bourses because of the way that it separates them from other kinds of stock exchanges. This led to European governments depending on private citizens for funds and loans, which was helpful especially to the British government because they had become notorious for overtaxing the people. The stock exchange grew to be relatively popular because people didn't have to buy entire businesses to invest their money, which eliminated a good part of the risk of investing. It took a while, but eventually tales of low-risk investing reached America and helped the stock market to be born. The early U.S. government was lacking in many basic institutions, one of them being a treasury. The U.S. Treasury Department was not set up until nearly 6 months after our first president was elected. Little did the Founding Fathers know, but this would eventually lead to an organized stock exchange, much like the one that Britain already had instituted. There were several problems that came from early America not having an organized stock exchange. Without one, trade could not develop nearly as quickly as it could otherwise. Early investors were also hesitant to do so because they could not learn about the companies that they were investing in, which were often located on different continents altogether. At the early foundation of the United States of America, it became imperative that a centralized bank should be formed for several reasons. For one, merchants and investors were annoyed that all transactions had to take place at their local banks, which made money transfers complicated, difficult, and dangerous. However, there were still some bankers that were content with setting up their own statewide banks and did not want to have to compete with a new central bank for their customers. Whether for good or bad, the central bank ended up crashing early on, which led the way for state banks to spring up everywhere. With the market being fairly well set up, opportunity after opportunity rose up for even the common people to make it big on the stock market. For example, Astor was a German who had immigrated to America with only a few $100s. In just a few years, he had reached over $250,000 in wealth, only to expand on this wealth and reach upwards of $20 million by the time of his death, worth over $600 million in today's money. However, with big gains there were big losses. One man entered the stock market with only $25, quickly earned about $150,000, and then lost it all and more in a very short time. People were willing to do almost anything to make a quick buck on the market, and this showed through several new tactics. Forward trading is when someone signs a contract to buy a certain amount of stock set up for about a month in advance. The idea is that maybe the stock price will increase while they are under contract, so that they can finish out the deal, sell the stock quickly, and make a quick profit. The problem with this was that there were very few laws regarding the practices legal in the stock market. So therefore, any contract made under the premise of the stock market was not necessarily legally binding and depended upon the honor of the other person. This did not stop people from being dishonest, and courts soon became full of dishonest trading cases that people could do nothing about. Another unscrupulous thing that people did was a method of price manipulation called wash sales. It is when a group of investors got together to manipulate the price of a specific stock by selling the stock to each other, causing the price of the stock to go down temporarily so that they could immediately buy it up again for a lower price. People sometimes use wash sales to report tax losses just before they had to turn their taxes in, and then sell the stock for a higher value later. Because of these newfound ways of corruption, two groups that are very well known today were established: bulls and bears. Bulls are investors that believe the market is going to go up, and therefore have an optimistic outlook, while bears are investors that have a pessimistic outlook, or in other words, believe that the market is going to fall in value. However, even though investors thought that they had all the tricks of the stock market figured out, they still had a lot to learn. Because the stock market was a relatively small and exclusive club of mostly wealthy investors, the United States economy still couldn't depend on the stock market completely, and were therefore forced to depend on investments from other countries. Without a doubt, America badly needed to have some sort of stock market from the beginning, but it would still take a while before the market completely matured. Today, the New York Stock Exchange has become the granddaddy for the other 13 exchanges in America. Traders no longer care who they trade with, they just look for the best deal. According to Paul Hansen, a chief financial advisor and portfolio manager, it has basically turned into a combination of a museum and a server farm. Almost all the trading is done electronically nowadays because it's quicker and cheaper. Other non-electronic trades are made by phone calls with other traders. Since there are over 2,000 public investable companies, new encounters are always being made. One of the best parts about being a trader is that there are always new components of businesses to research and explore. Exploration can also be made in portfolios of clients or oneself. It can also involve exploring new companies and researching information about them. Exchanging stocks involves constant evaluation of companies in the past and what they may do in the future. Another reason the New York Stock Exchange is not used too much is because there is no one left doing the open outcry trading that was once so prevalent. Open outcry is an older system of hand signals and verbal bids that were used to convey information on the trading floor. A contract is made when one trader yells out his selling price and another trader cries back that they will buy shares at that price. Another way to make exchanges is to go through third-party dealers outside of the New York Stock Exchange. One massive component of these deals is dark pool liquidity. It keeps the identity of the trader anonymous and hidden. This is beneficial so that the trader doesn't have to disclose how much money or shares they have in a particular company. When the broker wants to buy big sums of shares from a company, he does it over a string of days so as not to jostle the stock price. However, it is hard for him to get out using the same principle because he may want to get out immediately. This dark pool liquidity prevents the person on the other end from waiting for him to sell his shares in order that he can buy it at a lower price later. After all, the brokers only have to disclose their holdings in each company once a quarter. In conclusion, without a stock exchange, investing would be extremely difficult and would have greatly affected the early growth of countries by not allowing investors to become well acquainted with the companies that they were investing in and the products that they were selling. Because early America was largely dependent on foreign investors and trade income, it was sometimes difficult to make money when the global economy was slow, but the stock market helped to fix that. Today, investors around the globe are still dependent on the New York Stock Exchange, which is now part of a wider web of trade networks that have proved itself vital to the health of the global economy.